One of the most hotly contested questions in modern history is whether America's invasion of Iraq in 2003 was exploitative or necessary. America's invasion in 2003 of Iraq remains one of the most controversial military actions in modern history. The question of whether it was exploitative or necessary can be examined from multiple perspectives, acknowledging both the arguments put forward by supporters and critics of the invasion. Let me try to go for a balanced breakdown. So let me just put forth the arguments that suggested that the invasion was necessary, pro-America arguments. First of all, right off the block, Saddam Hussein's authoritarian regime. Now, Saddam was an autocratic ruler accused of committing atrocities, including the use of chemical weapons against Kurdish populations, right? That Halabja massacre in 1988 and brutal suppression of dissent. The US framed the invasion as an opportunity to liberate Iraqis from a tyrannical dictator and promote democracy in the Middle East. Next, there was perceived threats to regional stability. The US administration claimed that Saddam's regime posed a significant threat to regional stability due to its history of aggression, right? Iraq-Iran war, invasion of Kuwait in 1990. Although no weapons of mass destruction, right, WMDs, were found, the belief that Iraq could develop or possess WMDs was used to justify preemptive action. Then they said they are trying to combat terrorism. While Iraq had no direct ties to the 9/11 attacks, the US argued that Saddam's regime might collaborate with or support terrorist groups. I mean, it makes sense to some extent. He could have. This narrative, however, was largely unfounded, but there may have been some truth to it. Spread of democracy. The proponents also claim that a democratic Iraq could serve as a model for the region, fostering stability and reform in other.
So these were the arguments in favor of the invasion.
Now, arguments that suggest this invasion was exploitative, and there is a lot of muck. One is falsified premises for war. This invasion was primarily justified on claims that Iraq possessed WMDs and was linked to 9/11. Both were later debunked by even US's own authorities, investigative authorities, by UN, and this cast doubt on the legitimacy of the war. Critics also argue that these false claims were deliberately used to rally domestic and international support for a premeditated agenda. Then there were geopolitical and economic motivations. Iraq's vast oil reserves have led to many to accuse the US of prioritizing economic interests over humanitarian ones. Control over resources and securing a strategic foothold in the Middle East were seen as key drivers. US-based companies. There is one, Halliburton. They have profited immensely from reconstruction efforts, further fueling exploitation claims. Then there is destabilization of Iraq and the region. The removal of Saddam without a coherent post-war plan led to political chaos, sectarian violence, and it led to the rise of terrorist organizations like ISIS. Many argue that Iraq's authoritarian regime was a regional stabilizer and that its collapse unleashed far worse instability. These are not exactly my views. I am telling you what has existed, what is the narrative for and against. And then they argue about the humanitarian costs. The invasion and subsequent occupation resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, widespread displacement, significant destruction of Iraq's infrastructure. The hardships faced by ordinary Iraqis arguably overshadow any benefits from the regime change. And so, was it a mixed bag? Was it necessary as well as exploitative? It can be both, right? The invasion did lead to Saddam Hussein's removal, an end to his regime's human rights abuses, and the opportunity for Iraqis to participate in democratic processes. But these gains came at a tremendous cost, and the chaos that followed arguably made the situation worse for most Iraqis. Many analysts view the invasion as an unnecessary and deeply flawed attempt at regime change. And they say it was driven more by American strategic interests than genuine concern for Iraqis. I buy that. However, others contend that leaving Saddam in power would have perpetuated authoritarianism and his oppressive policies, though the tools used to address the problem remain highly contested. Ultimately, whether the invasion was necessary or exploitative depends on how one weighs the humanitarian, strategic, and moral trade-offs. What is clear is that the lack of a post-war strategy and the reliance on false premises severely undermined any potential long-term benefits.